Good morning, Captain Carpenter. Good morning, cadets. My presentation is going to be on countering cartel threats to U.S. security. We're going to go over what the problem is, the root causes, courses of action, recommended solution, a summary, Q&A, and the works cited lastly. Very simply, the Mexican drug cartel is a transnational criminal organization. So they are operating not just in Mexico anymore, but they are operating south of Mexico, in the US, Canada, and in some instances, if not many instances at this point, across the pond. They are no longer limited to just drug trafficking. They are now human trafficking, selling, and collecting arms, as well as money laundering. As a result of the successes that they've experienced in those areas, uh, they've destabilized communities, weakened law enforcement, and threatened U.S. sovereignty. In terms of those communities, that is occurring whether it's be by recruiting or threatening, kidnapping, or just selling those drugs in the community and causing them to fall so dependent on those drugs that they can't operate. In terms of law enforcement, they very often bribe, whether that's local law enforcement in Mexico or the local law enforcement along the southern border. They will present them with money uh, in a variety of different amounts so that they can turn a blind eye so that their operations can continue. As a result of those enforcers turning a blind eye, they allow those drugs and those people to be sold, thus threatening U.S. sovereignty because no one is protecting that southern border. As a result of this, or correction, please, as a result of their efforts that have occurred for several decades at this point, they've been designated as a foreign terrorist organization because of how profound their crimes have been. Very simply, the border is one of the biggest thing that is allowing this problem to continue, given how open it's been over the last couple of years. And even when efforts are being made to monitor the area, they are finding ways around it, whether that's through building tunnels, which has been the biggest thing as of late, given that people are continuing to report new findings of these tunnels that are being built so that people can get right under the border and into the US. In terms of the military is limited to how much they can operate within US territory and to what extent. And as a result of that, they are very unlikely to coordinate with law enforcement because they aren't operating to begin with. In terms of intelligence, much of our funding isn't being put into that, or at least prior to this year, wasn't being put into that. So we don't have the same timely responses or coordinated investigations as we would if the military was doing it themselves. For financial systems, things like laundering and shell companies are being exploited, and in some instances, even crypto, because crypto can't be traced to anything. So we can't have someone just shut it down. And then with the Mexican authorities, there is a lot of inconsistent collaborations because we have known that they tend to be compromised more times than not. And so it's very difficult to find some uh, units or authorities in the Mexican community that can be trusted. And so for the first course of action, very simply, is increasing funding for those federal organizations that can operate without limitations. So that's going to be the DEA, the FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security. Those areas are definitely going to be our best bet. And by increasing their funding and training, we'd then be able to enhance community policing and establish those dedicated intelligence units, right? So with that enhanced community policing, we can check out those areas a lot more often. And with intelligence units working actively, we'll know exactly when something's happening. For that second course of action, this is going to be implementing that military support. So that's going to be utilizing our assets in the air and in the ocean. For example, with the drones, we do have a base in Nevada that is focused on drones, and that wouldn't be a very difficult effort to deploy those drones to monitor that border. That next aspect would be the rapid responses in cyber warfare. With those efforts in shell companies and cryptocurrency, a lot of that stuff is just being tracked digitally, so we can very quickly establish where these funds are coming from, why, and whether they're within reason. And if they're not, we can flag them immediately. The next point is going to be to conduct training with Mexican forces. Now, that is assuming we find uh, personnel that hasn't been compromised. If the personnel can pass an extensive background check, then we can conduct those joint trainings because we don't have to worry about the knowing that if they are compromised and we give them the training, then they'll use that training against us. And that next effort would be using those Title 10 forces, not necessarily to put boots on the ground, but very simply to get that intelligence and logistics going so that we can understand what's going on beyond the US border. The third point being probably one of the safest options and gonna be another one of the fastest and most effective options is gonna be to expand the Office of Foreign Assets Control. Because with doing that, they'll be able to implement those sanctions against cartel-linked entities. So that's going to be freezing cartel assets, partnering with those international banks to monitor uh, what kind of flow of money is coming in, whether it's um, fair or arbitrary in terms of how much is coming in all at once. And then sanctions on those non-compliant governments. So governments that are potentially aware or having cartel operations occur within their areas and they're not doing anything about it, it's safe to say that they're probably turning a blind eye. And if they aren't turning a blind eye, they're being ignorant to the matter. So it'd be safest that we make sure that those governments understand that we are serious about the issue and we want this to end and that they should and it should be and we have their best interests at heart to limit the cartel's operation within their territory. And that again, that's going to tie into tightening those shell corporations with the sanctions on those non-compliant governments. In terms of recommended solutions, very simply, that's going to be enhanced domestic law enforcement as previously discussed, as well as those Title 10 forces focusing on intel and economic sanctions. Why we do the solutions is very simply because it's going to target both the operational and financial infrastructure of the cartel. Their entire operation is how well they're structured. And if we can start chipping away, if not cracking away at what holds them up, then they can't function very much longer. There are potential risk to these solutions, even though the phrasing it as solution makes it seem like there's no problems. There's always going to be some kind of issue with very simply diplomatic tensions. The Mexican authorities, much on a much higher scale, may not be too fond of us operating on their land. There are legal limitations with our military. There are going to be instances in which we simply can't operate, and it has been decided by the powers above that they shouldn't be operating there, that this isn't an issue that we should be targeting. And then, of course, very simply, retaliation from the cartel. They're not just simply going to let us take down their operation. Summary. We went over what the problem was, the root causes, courses of action, some solutions. The summary, we're going to go into the Q&A, and we're going to go into the works cited. Now, for the sake of the presentation, there aren't any questions that can be asked. We're just going to skip past this, and this is the works cited. This concludes my briefing.